My name is Father Dennis Lyle. I'm the pastor here at St. Benedict's. And on behalf of our community of faith, I just want to extend my condolences to Minerva, the family, and all the friends who have gathered here to mourn the loss of Benedict, but also to celebrate his life. And although I did not have the privilege to get to know Benedict, as I was thinking about the homily, I really reflected on his name. So he was born on the feast of St. Barnabas, St. Benedict. And as I looked through the booklet that you guys so wonderfully put together, I really thank you for this. There was a lot of work that went into this, and it's very, very well done. In looking at the pictures, a couple of things that I thought of about St. Barnabas, and it seems to me, I hope, that they're also part of Bernabé's life. So a little reflection on what St. Barnabas and who Barnabas was. He was one of these early Christians who gave up everything for the sake of the faith, gave his wealth to the apostles to distribute to the poor, and then became a significant leader in the Christian community. And anyone that's able to give away his possessions must be a man who is most generous. And a generous person is often a joyful person. And looking through the pictures here that you have selected, it seems to me that Benedict was definitely a joyous person. I hope I'm correct. You guys are smiling at me. So I hope. And I mean, it was really interesting as I was looking through it. I mean, how a facial expression can say so much about a person's personality. But looking at the pictures here and the ones yesterday at the funeral home, it really did strike me that, like his namesake Barnabas, Benedict must have been a generous man, and with generosity comes joy. And joy is definitely a characteristic that we need in a world that often is bombarded by negative news and difficult news. So the Christian that's able to incorporate that joy, their faith, into their daily life and communicate that with others is certainly a blessing, not only for the immediate family, but for so many people around him. Another characteristic of Barnabas, so St. Barnabas, one of his great works was convincing the early Christians to allow St. Paul into the community. They were all a little concerned about this man that had been persecuting the church, and now all of a sudden found his new faith. And so you can imagine they were a little reluctant to allow St. Paul into the Christian community. But it was Barnabas who was welcoming. It was Barnabas who convinced them. It was Barnabas who took care and kind of took Paul under his wings and educated him in the faith. And just looking at the pictures once again here in the booklet, there are very few pictures where Benedict is alone. He must have been a man that was able to draw other people to himself. He must have had an inviting attitude that easily drew people around him. And like St. Paul, he must have taken the time to also pass on the faith with others. As I listened to the grandchildren do the readings, they did wonderfully. That to me says that the faith that Barnabas shared with Paul was also the faith that Benedict shared with his family. And it's evident in a way that the children, 2 generations later, are able to comfortably speak and read from the scriptures. Another quality I think about St. Barnabas is his willingness then to spread the gospel and go to different places. And not to be afraid to enter into conversation with different groups and different communities. I don't know how much traveling your husband, your dad did, but I'm certain that he went back and forth to the Philippines here and there. But also, he was definitely involved in his parish community. And so beyond simply passing on the faith to his immediate family, he took an interest in the larger community as well. Something that St. Barnabas was also most interested in. And so the ability to reach out, participate in different groups, to be available, to listen to people, to share with them. These are all qualities that I am aware of in St. Barnabas. And once again, just on the little information that I have, seems that Bernabe was able to incorporate them into his life. I think it's important also the fact that whether or not Bernabe did this consciously or not, that all of us really can learn and gain so much from our patron saints, the men and women for whom we are named. And oftentimes we look into their history and their past and their lives, and sure enough, there are signs there that we can identify with. And those are things that we can build on with our own personality. Reading through them, the readings that you selected for the Mass today, once again, there's certain characteristics that are present in there that I think are certainly qualities or characteristics that you must have seen in your husband and in your dad. On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will provide for all people. Once again, my sense is that a generous and joyous man was happy to have others around. I'm sure there was no one who entered the house that did not leave without receiving something to eat or drink. That generosity of the Lord on the mountain, rewarding the people of Israel, would have been something I'm sure that was part of Bernabe's life as well. And St. Paul reminds us that no one lives for oneself and no one dies for oneself. Our entire task as human beings is to really die to oneself and to live for others. And it's such a difficult thing. We are all drawn to kind of focus on who we are, to meet my needs, to do what I want. But the Christian is called to die to oneself, to live for others, to put others first and to put myself second or third or last. That requires sacrifice. Anyone who is able to raise a family has to understand the sacrifices and the challenges that means. To give up what is good or pleasurable to me in order to meet the needs of my children, my grandchildren, my wife, whatever it is that's going on in the family. And finally, in the Gospel, Jesus says that grain of wheat is useless until it falls to the ground and dies. So my sense is that even as fruitful in a sense as Bernabe was in life, we have to be confident that so in death he will continue to inspire his family and his friends and those who knew him. As a priest, I always feel that my responsibility is simply to remind all of us about the mystery of God, Christ's death and resurrection, the promise that Jesus made to us, that in baptism we really do die to ourselves and live for Jesus. And those of us who have been baptized are promised a share in the Lord's resurrection as well. We know all these things intellectually, and yet I'm sure at a moment like this there are challenges. We believe that, but we also experience loss. And so how do we both acknowledge our own feelings, our sense of loss, and our sadness, at the same time that we place our trust and confidence in the words that Jesus has taught us? I've always liked these lines towards the end of the Gospel. Where I am, there also will my servant be. The Lord desires nothing more than that each and every one of us be with Him. For all the work that we can do on behalf of the Lord in this life, for all the responsibilities that we have, ultimately the Lord's desire is that He wants us to be with Him, just as we want to be with our loved ones, with those that care for us. but those for whom we care. And I think it's safe to say that as a faithful servant of the Lord, Bernabe is no doubt present with the master that he found, with the master from whom he learned what joy and generosity and evangelization and sharing the faith and being present to others was all about, dying to oneself for the sake of others. These are the things that you, I'm sure, are aware of, and I simply want to remind you to not forget those things. These very simple traits which perhaps you take for granted as part of Bernabe's life and personality are not always evident in everyone's life, and yet they're so desperately needed in our society today. So once again, I want to thank the family really for the amount of work and effort that you put into preparing this funeral liturgy. It really does say so much about your connection with Bernabe, but also how much the faith meant to him and to you. I'm very grateful for the way that he was able to share that faith with the different generations within the family. And I'm sure that that generosity will bear fruit in the future for the life of the church, as well as in your own family and community. So as we come together then as people of faith, we are sorrowful. We have lost someone. It's not going to be the same. You cannot go back to the way life was. It's always going to be different now without Bernabe present. But we also have that confidence in the faith that we have practiced for so long, and the faith that Benedict lived, the confidence that we're each of us as servants of the